Good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. We have an exciting show in store for you today. We'll be talking with former Congressman and the current chairman of the Steuben County Republican Committee, Joe Sempolinski. He's going to be our guest. We have a lot to cover with him, as we always do. We're going to spend a lot of time with him. Thank you again to everyone that reaches out and says, hey, the audio sounds good, or weighing in on some of the stories of the day, which we're going to get to here in just a second. Because yesterday I brought to you a story from the White House. And the story was that the White House is just really upset that the media's coverage hasn't been more glowing towards the president, that they haven't attacked Republicans enough. And we know this administration is very quick to pressure media corporations, social media corporations. And many of you were upset. And there's a really good piece by Miranda Devine, so I thought I'd get right into it after we read a couple comments from you yesterday. First up, hopefully this works good. The idea of the letter, and this is the letter they were sending out to the media corps, is outrageous and merely another means to intimidate and continue the one-sided, lopsided narrative. We deserve to hear all facts and make our own decisions. There is plenty of coverage on most outlets with little mention, if any, of the conservative views. And that's a very good point. It's normally, and you see it in the media's coverage, because they, ironically, even after this letter was released, they're doing the same thing. They're not even shying away from it. And if there is a Republican point of view in the piece, it's from those deemed a rhino, people that are very quick to cave, hoping again that the media will like them. Of course, that's never the case. It's all about control and silencing we the people. We cannot have it, and we shouldn't have it. We have a constitution that protects freedom of speech. So that's our first comment. Our next comment. Forget the top of that. I had the announcement up there, excuse me. But below that, it really upsets me that newsmen who want to be respected for being fair and truthful can be so deceiving. It also upsets me that people who really know what is right and wrong still just go along with the lies. How can they even look at themselves in the mirror? I think that's a very good point. But I will say, I believe, even if they know what's right and wrong, and even if they know they should be reporting on something, they were taught back in journalism school that really the biggest honor you can receive as a journalist is to bring down a Republican president, is to attack Republicans, Woodward and Bernstein idea. So the ends justify the means, because it's really many of their goals when they got into journalism. But I do think those are good points. And Miranda Devine from the New York Post highlighted this. What a desperately presumptuous act it is for the White House counsel office to blast out a memo ordering media organizations to apply the blowtorch to Republicans and defend Joe Biden in the impending House impeachment inquiry. So they sent this to all the major news organizations. It was by Ian Sams, and it was called, or it was declared in the memo, it's time for the media, imagine saying this to the media, it's time for the media to do more to scrutinize House Republicans' demonstrably false claims that they are basing the impeachment on, And as Miranda Devine says, and I thought this was a very good point before we go to break, talk about ungrateful. The White House is making overt what has been covert and humiliating their media handmaidens in the process. But yet the media did not change. The media continued to protect, and there's another piece at the New York Post saying, of course the press will protect Biden on impeachment. It already has. But I'll continue. They don't need a public rallying cry, meaning the media. They already know what to do. They've been carrying water for Joe Biden since he first shuffled out of his basement. So really tying in what you, the viewer, had to say. So as always, before we go to break, you can contact me if you have questions for Joe Sempolinski. If you want to weigh in on the topics that we discuss with Joe, you can do that as well. Just contact me there. And of course, when I take this off the screen, you'll notice on the bottom of your screen, that phone number stays. So you can text, you can leave a voicemail, and we will try to get to it before the program is over. All right, let's take our first short break, and then we'll be back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We'll be going to Joe Sempolinski here in just a moment. But I did mention that piece from the New York Post. I was talking about Miranda Devine. But there's also this piece, just quickly, because I want to take another break so we can catch up and have a little more time to talk with Joe. But as the Post editorial board says, wow, the Biden White House felt perfectly comfortable in publicly telling the media to go on an all-out attack against the House GOP impeachment inquiry. More telling still, the press, by and large, failed to even complain at the impropriety of presidential orders on what to cover and how. And I would say, it doesn't surprise me because, again, they know what their job is, and that's to defend the president. But I know that one thing that's always kind of been a pet peeve of not just myself, but those in the media, people will say something when you should do this or you should do that. That's not to say, obviously, I always encourage guests that I should have on the program or topics. I'm not saying it like that, but there's always this, kind of pressure campaign from people that maybe don't watch the show or in the radio days listen to the show. And so for the media to get that same treatment coming from the White House, you should do this. You have to do this. This makes it even worse. Should can be bad enough if it's not coming from the right place. Have to is next level. We'll put it that way. So they're not only telling them what to cover, the media, it's how to cover as well. What a contrast, says the New York Post editorial board, to the pearl clutching when the last president, more rudely, granted, they say in here, shared his thoughts on what the Fourth Estate should be doing. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about the memo released by the White House to the media demanding that they put, basically, I think Miranda Devine said, a blowtorch to Republicans and make sure to protect the White House. So let's take another short break, and then we're going to lock in with Joe Sempolinski, the former congressman and current chairman of the Steuben County Republican Committee. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are being joined this morning by the former congressman and current chairman of the Steuben County Republican Committee, Joe Sempolinski. Good morning, Joe.
Frank, pleasure to be back. How's everything going?
Everything's good here. You know what, Joe? Last time you were on the program, we were bragging up how excited we were to be at the Steuben County Fair. And you signed me up for the Steuben County Fair like a swell guy, and you let me pick the exact time the pig races were not happening. Could you explain yourself?
Oh, well, I worked a shift where they were happening,
yeah.
And I brought my kids, and actually it was funny because I was watching them with my kids, and I turned, and standing next to me is one of our state Supreme Court judges, also watching the pig races. So it was very prestigious.
That was well, it always is. But what a fun time. We're going to get into the nitty gritty here. But just to highlight, it's so much fun because you see old friends, you see new friends. People genuinely want to talk to you.
Yeah.
It's a good event.
It's a real community event. Yeah, mm-hmm. Everybody from every walk of life in Steuben County, especially in the Bath area, shows up. So Ida Blast, who was very successful this year, our booth, and it's definitely a tradition. As far as I know, that particular location has been the Republican booth since like Abe Lincoln, or at least as long as I will say that, but as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
That particular spot. And people know when they come in. They, a lot of times they know to look and see whose signs are up, and they learn what races are happening that year. So in some ways, especially in Central Steuben, it's sort of a kickoff for the fall election season for the people that are at the fair to learn, what are we voting on this November.
Right. So, Joe, let's get into some of the news of the day, and there's so much to talk about. I thought we could start with the impeachment inquiry. What are you thinking? What did you think when you first saw that was going to happen?
Well, I'm in favor of it.
Sure.
Personally, it's an inquiry. So we're going to take where the facts go, what the speaker has said, and you can't determine if there is something that merits impeachment unless you actually investigate it.
Right.
And certainly our Democrat friends had no hesitation to investigate President Trump. Now, there's certainly a lot of smoke there, and there's a lot of things that Hunter Biden is on tape doing, which are blatantly illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have him saying, "Oh, my dad is sitting next to me. He's going to be mad if you don't give us the money.
Right.
10% for the big guy. I got to get half my income from my dad." So from the son of the president's own mouth and from his own texts, there is implication of the president monetizing his office when he was vice president. If that doesn't merit at least getting to the bottom of it and adjudicating, all right, is just some jerk son running his mouth, or is really the vice president of the United States shaking people down? That's what an inquiry adjudicates. So I think it's most definitely appropriate, given what we know for an absolute stone cold fact that Hunter Biden was saying and doing.
And I also am going to be very curious, if we can get the information, about all those alias emails that the then vice president, was using. And how many more alias names are there that we're not aware of, too?
Right. I don't know of any reason why you would do that.
Right.
I have a personal email. When I was in office, I had a government email.
Right.
They do things like, if you're a staffer, your email might be joe.semplinsky or Semplinsky J. You can figure out what somebody's email is just by knowing their first and last name. What they do for elected officials, they sort of scramble it. So I think my email was like JS3041, just some random numbers. I don't even know what it was.
Right.
But it wasn't John Doe.
Right.
Or Carlos Danger. Or
good reference.
Whatever. So I don't know what a legitimate reason for doing that is.
No.
I could imagine something generic like VP 203.
Sure.
Is the vice president's, but that's not what we're talking about here. And it doesn't seem like it was some sort of government issued anonymous email so you could have stuff not get hacked. So there's a lot of smoke there. It's not like they're just making it up out of whole cloth. We've all seen what came off of Hunter Biden's laptop. We've all seen what he was saying. There's no reason to give him, from Burisma, the level of money and compensation he was getting unless you think you're getting access, rightly or wrongly, to the vice president. So thanks to his ne'er-do-well son, I think it's incumbent upon the House to do an investigation. And if it turns out that money was going to Joe Biden and he was truly monetizing his office, as his son says he was doing,
yes,
he should most definitely be impeached and removed from office.
Well, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, I want to ask you about the letter that the White House sent, because, by golly, the coverage has just been too tough on the Biden administration.
Oh, yeah, the media is so rough on the Democrats.
So I want to talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. This is the M.A. Neal Financial Services section of our program, because we're being joined by Joe Semplinsky. Joe, before we went to break, I had mentioned the memo, the letter, the demand sent by the White House that the media just start be nice to the Biden administration for once, would you?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty ridiculous.
I didn't get the memo, though, Joe. I'm not in that elite list. They didn't send it to me.
They say, hey, look, you got to look at what they're saying here in the House. We didn't do any of that stuff. It's pretty ridiculous that. Well, let's just break this down. There's a couple of things going on here. One, there is clearly a media bias in this country. Sure. The narrative, and I think it's not so much what's covered, it's how it's covered, right? Where if I was on tape, smoking crack,
sure,
like Hunter Biden, I don't think the narrative would be, oh, I'm an addict,
right,
or oh, my dad loves me so much.
Leave him alone.
Takes care of me.
Yeah.
This is not the narratives that get produced around Republicans, and you see that over and over again where they misbehave, and suddenly there's an editorial that comes out a few days later saying, well, you got to take this into account in this context. So for the president to claim like, oh, you're not thoroughly investigating this, or I'm being treated unfairly, is really ridiculous given how much slack that he gets compared to what Donald Trump or George Bush got.
Miranda Devine even put it as, how ungrateful does that look? Because I was saying before you came on, right, I know one of the pet peeves in media is you should cover this, or you've got to talk about this. And, when it comes from a good place, I'm always like, oh, that's, yeah, of course I'll look at that. But when it comes from someone that never watches or listens, you go, that's what we're having here. The media is being told what to do by the White House.
Right, and given all of the grief that Republican presidents, especially Donald Trump, got for supposedly they're anti-media or anti-freedom of speech or anti-freedom of press or whatever it was, for the president of the United States to issue a memo to the press saying, "I want you to look at this story in this way and cover it this way." How is that not intimidation?
Yeah.
How is that not a violation of freedom of press? It's the president of the United States. That's an implied threat.
It really is.
If you don't cover it the way I want, maybe you don't get access to the president anymore. Maybe you don't get to ask him questions anymore. Maybe, and again, he's in charge of the government.
Right.
Oh, maybe we start looking at your taxes or looking at this. He actually is doing what the narrative was that somehow Republican administrations, especially the Trump administration, were claimed to have been doing. Trump just didn't give the press the answers they liked.
Right. And
that's
then
what happened with him.
Yeah.
This is wildly inappropriate, and it shows the fact that he's not getting really more grief for this shows that the media bias is in his favor. And again, just the stories you see about the way the narrative is constructed, that the Democrats, like Chuck Schumer, can get in front of a camera and say, "Oh, this is a witch hunt."
Right.
We can't have impeachments that are witch hunts when they just did it.
Yeah.
Last term.
Yes.
And they don't get called out for this double standard. So this is very inappropriate and is actually an attack on the freedom of press.
It is.
That is very dangerous, but also is infuriating for Republicans who do not get the benefit of the doubt or the narratives produced that the Democrats get all the time.
Well, and so often, and I talk about it on the program a lot, it's not so much about what they cover, it's about what they don't cover. And that's what we have with Hunter. With Hunter, I know when the sweetheart plea deal first came out, it hit me that a lot of these news outlets, this is the first time they've reported on it. So they almost had to go back and tell their viewers, their readers, their listeners, this is the story in case you didn't hear it, because you didn't hear it from us.
Yeah, and that is, I think, what infuriates regular people. Not only the legal double standard, where like if they had a tape of you driving 120 with a handgun that was illegal, smoking crack with a prostitute, you'd be in jail, and everybody knows that.
They haven't caught me yet, Joe. They haven't caught me yet.
That's right. Yeah. They don't have a car fast enough. But everybody knows that from the legal standpoint.
Sure.
But everybody also knows it from the PR standpoint. I mean, if that was Donald Trump Jr., or if that was one of the Bush twins back in the day, or any Republican presidential family member, it would have been the biggest story in the world, all day, every network, all the time. Pop culture media would have covered it. It would have been the biggest thing that's ever happened in this country, and everyone knows it.
Yeah, that's what's so frustrating.
Drive people right up the wall.
And to your point, you remember the stories about the Bush twins underage drinking, or they were drinking at college, and you would have thought that was the end of the world. I mean, that was covered on everything. I believe it was even, skits on Saturday Night Live, to your point, pop culture like that. And they criticize us for doing whataboutism, which I think is ridiculous, because whataboutism is what laws are based on. But you look at, if any of the Trumps, I don't care what Trump family, even if they were third cousins twice removed, if anything like this would have happened, it would have been nonstop 24/7 coverage.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And we know it because how much of a story was everything that Jared Kushner or Ivanka Trump or any of the Trumps did. They were claiming they were they were violating all these rules because they were advising the president or something. They were constantly in the media for, did they give him too much advice? Right. And Hunter's smoking crack.
I know.
It's insane that the double standard is so glaring and blatant, and yet it continues to exist, and they try to gaslight the country into somehow this is some sort of normal thing. And on top of that, then, as we just mentioned, the president says, "Oh, you guys got to start treating me fairly," when he's gotten the biggest pass that any president's gotten, since the last Democrat.
Right. But if you even look at it, it's not as if Hunter's out of the limelight. I mean, he's staying at the White House. I mean, this is all valid. He
may or may not have left cocaine at the White House.
Right.
we still had the absurdity of, we found cocaine in the White House where the president's cocaine addicted son was nearby.
Right.
And we can't figure out whose cocaine it is in the most secure building in the world, which we've talked about before.
Right.
So it's not like he's off in Alaska somewhere living his life, doing his thing completely separate. He is still within the orbit and the immediate circle of the president of the United States. And with him, we're supposed to somehow, because he's worried about his addiction or whatever. Right. And again, I'm sympathetic to people who have a substance abuse issue. Don't get me wrong. But you really think, again, that would be the narrative if we were talking about a member of the Trump, Bush, Reagan, Nixon family, whatever.
Right.
It just doesn't work.
Well, and I would argue that the influence peddling or alleged influence peddling could still be going on when you have Hunter selling his paintings, a novice painter, for how much? For millions. And hopefully this investigation or inquiry looks into it. But who are buying these paintings?
I don't know. And it's so much so.
Yes.
Isn't that how he paid his child support?
Yeah.
Giving his child a painting?
Yeah.
Because they were worth so much money, supposedly.
So
and
sad.
I mean, it's not like he's some sort of trained artist, though, and he was known for being a painter before.
Right.
And, now they're worth more because of who he is, but he was always a painter or something like that. This is pretty ridiculous, and it's a pretty easy way to launder money. Yeah. Where, he draws a stick figure on a canvas, and then suddenly it's worth $20 million. Yeah. Well, it's like a sticker store where I was buying the weed. I was buying the sticker.
Great point.
Yeah. I wasn't handing a bucket of cash to the president's son to get access. I was buying his horrible painting.
Right.
Yeah. It's this fig leaf of fiction that again, they think the average person is stupid. That drives the average person nuts because the average person is not stupid. No. The average person lives in the real world, has seen how the real world works, right? And they can't have the wool pulled over their eyes that easily. And it's really a disgrace to think that you can trick average people that much. And I'm glad to see, especially in this day and age, where there are alternative forms of media, right? Both social media, that there is ways to get around the narrative, and that's what drives liberals up the wall. When you don't go along with their narrative, that somehow is brought down from on high, and you question it, and then of course a couple of years later that narrative turned out to be false anyway, something that would have got you blocked or canceled. 2 years later it's the truth. Whatever.
And another example of the White House putting pressure on social media. But we got to take another break. But real quick, Joe, if you were someone that graduated college with an art degree, you've been a struggling artist your whole life, not making a dime, and you see this amount of money that Hunter Biden's getting, that's got to be maddening.
I mean, Hunter Biden is a very maddening person. Yes. Most people, I think, discuss.
That's right. All right, let's take a break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Stay with us. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. This is the M.A. Neal Financial Services section of our program, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Joe Sempolinski is our guest. So, Joe, this really hasn't been what you'd call a great week for Biden, and I want to pick your brain on this because you have the impeachment inquiry, and they're brushing that aside, even though his answer was kind of weird to what he thought of it. But anyway, you have Joe Scarborough, who would normally defend the president in this scenario, but he's saying that even Democrats off the air, kind of throwing Democrats under the bus, talking in private, are saying that Biden is too old.
Well, I think that's because he's too old.
Okay. Next question here.
I met the president, and he's a frail guy. Yeah. And you can't hide it, really. No. So the conundrum that the Democratic Party has is he is the president. And it's very hard, and you start to see this narrative build where people say, all right, they're starting to build the infrastructure to push him aside. Right. And that's all well and good, but I don't know the mechanism by which you do it. He just says, no, I'm not leaving. I'm the president. Because they're talking about how much Donald Trump's up in the primary. Biden's up even more. He's got RFK Jr. run against him. RFK Jr. has dropped down into the high single digits at this point. So Biden's coasting to the nomination. So if you have a sitting president, how do you get rid of him, even if he's completely out to lunch? Right. Unless he does something ideologically that really crosses his base. which he hasn't done because he's governed so far to the left. In fact, the reason why there's an opening for a Republican to defeat him is because he's governed so far to the left
Right.
without a clear mandate to do so. So it's tough to see what mechanism. And then what I've said to people is, because people come up to me all the time and say, oh, is Biden really going to be the nominee? And I say, I think, he probably will be for the reason I just described. And they don't want to hear it, but because
No.
people come up to me that don't like Biden.
Right.
But then I also point out, Joe Biden's got the greatest insurance policy that anybody can have.
Yes.
Because the vice president is Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And you may think Joe Biden's out to lunch. You may think he's lost 4 or 5 steps. You may think he's out of his depth. Kamala Harris is worse.
Yep.
She ain't never had it.
Right. Exactly.
He lost it.
People forget that
didn't
she
have
never got a primary vote. She never made it that far in the presidential race last time. People kind of remember, ironically, the time that she calls her now boss racist was her big moment, and that was her big
That was
moment.
her entire campaign.
Yeah.
She got a spike in the polls for like a week
Yep.
because of that.
Yeah.
And then she gets the job for whatever reason.
Exactly.
And so if normally, if there was concern
Mhm.
about the competency of the president, and he's going into a re-election, if you would imagine just a scenario like that, the obvious person that the party leadership, such as it exists still, would sort of push him aside for would be the vice president.
Right.
Nobody wants to do that because Biden, there's concern that he's going to have a close race because of his issues. If they nominate Kamala Harris, we could nominate a shoe, we could nominate
Right.
a hat, we could nominate anybody,
Right.
and they're going to win by 15 points.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have the clear person waiting in line. Somewhere Gavin Newsom is begging for attention.
Please.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's not like that obvious
Mm-hmm.
choice where you can really sit Joe Biden down and say, listen, you might lose, but if we nominate X,
Right.
they're clearly going to win.
Mhm.
That person doesn't exist.
No.
So they're sort of stuck with Biden. I mean, I don't see the mechanism where, barring, again, some sort of major ideological break with his base, which is not going to happen.
No.
Or, and I don't wish any ill will on anybody.
No, of
but
course not.
maybe he has some sort of health crisis. Obviously, he's in that age range.
Mhm.
He's probably going to be the nominee.
Right.
And I just don't see how he's not.
And it was shocking because we're talking about Biden's age. When Van Jones last week said, "We're saying we're going to hire him for 5 more years," and you forget that the next year, yes, it's all campaigning, but we're not talking. You hear 4 years, that's bad enough. 5 years.
Well, that's the other piece of the Vice President Harris question,
Right.
where I'm sure one of the major narratives that the Republicans are going to point out in September, October, November of next year is, all right, you vote for Biden, you're not really voting for President Biden.
Right.
You're voting for President Harris.
Yes.
Because if he gets elected, do you really think, and again, I'm not wishing any ill on Joe
No.
Biden, and we may be talking about something that isn't a death, but is something where he just can't do the job.
Sure.
But do you really, how confident are you
Mhm.
that he goes a full second term
Right.
and you're not really elevating somebody like Kamala Harris, who is just completely incompetent?
Right.
That is going to be a major factor, I think, in a lot of voters. Because again, the average voter is smart. They realize how old Joe Biden is. They can see it. They realize the implications of putting him in office for a 4 years is a long time.
That's all. Yeah.
Of another 4-year term, and who you may really get running the free world.
Right.
That may have some swing voters go, hey, I'm going to vote for the Republican nominee.
Did you see, speaking of that with Harris, and I want to talk about another article here in just a moment, but you sparked my memory, that Nancy Pelosi, of all people, was asked, do you think Harris makes a good VP? And her quote is, he, meaning Biden thinks so, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, that's
Is that a
sort
vote of confidence or what?
Phrase. Yeah. And she's running for the election.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was just announced this
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for Republicans, I think that's good because you still have her as a sort of boogeyman.
Right.
Right?
Sure.
Or you can say, oh, Nancy Pelosi, which is good. But this is also part of the, it doesn't help the Biden so old narrative.
Right.
Pelosi's still around and she's in her 80s. And it's, so that in some weird way, is sort of a boon to the Republicans that Nancy just refuses to hang it up.
It really is.
I was surprised. I figured once because most people who were speaker or leader or something, when they're done, they don't like not being speaker,
right?
Being a rank and file member, so they usually leave pretty quick. But she can't stop, won't stop. She's just going to keep on doing what her thing is. And,
she will.
And God help San Francisco.
That's right. We got to take another short break. More on this when we come back. Stay with us. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. This is the M.A. Neal Financial Services section of our program. Joe, before we went to break, I said there's another article that I wanted to mention, and that's Dave Ignatius from the Washington Post. He has a piece out that not only should Biden step aside and not run for re-election, but Harris shouldn't be involved in the mix either. And to add on top of it, if you're thinking this is some conservative or something, it's not. He wrote this piece, and I can't remember where I read it. And it's such a great way to put it, that basically he wrote it in a loving tone, like if you had to sit your father or mother down and say, you can't drive any longer, I'm sorry. And that's really how it...
We got to take the keys to the country away from Grandpa.
Yeah. Isn't that horrible? But that's how it's written.
Well, I think where some of this is coming from is they see the polls.
Yes.
Right? Everybody sees the polls. And the polls show, if you go to Real Clear Politics, which is where I tend to go, it's they average them, right? Any one poll could be anything. They tend to, I like their average. And the polls sort of consistently show that it's within like a point.
Yeah.
I think Biden's up like 0.9 or something over Trump in a hypothetical matchup. And they're seeing this going, oh boy.
Yeah.
They're having sort of deja vu from Hillary versus Trump in 2016.
And it doesn't even weigh in with Cornel West in the mix.
That's right, and that is true. If you have Cornel West, he draws 3 or 4 points from the far left, and it becomes very competitive. And also, if you get if the No Labels group ends up putting a candidate in, some people think that draws equally. Some people think that draws more from Biden. But anytime you lower the number you need to get, Donald Trump's got a very the conventional wisdom about Trump is that he's got a low ceiling but a high basement.
Right.
And by that, what I mean is, he's not going to get to 55, 60% of the vote because just there's a lot of people that don't like him, but he's never going to drop.
Right.
We're seeing that in the primary right now, where there's just people that are going with him that are the always Trumpers.
Yeah.
And so he can't drop too far. And so if you have multi-candidate election, suddenly the amount that you need isn't 50%.
Right.
It's 45. For somebody with a high basement, that's usually an advantage. So I think they're getting really nervous that the election is looking like it's going to be very close. I'm surprised that they're surprised,
right?
Because this has been a very polarized country now for a while, and we've had some very close elections for a while. So it's like the liberals in their bubble in Washington and New York, they're starting to wake up and realize, oh,
not again. Yeah.
There's a huge chunk of the country that doesn't think like we do, and they're going to vote that way again.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And they need to pull their head out of the sand, and they're starting to do it. And there's certain elements of the Democratic Party starting to hit the panic button, as if you subbed in somebody who was younger, suddenly they'd be up 20 points, which is insane.
Right.
That is naivete. That is wishful thinking. This is going to be a close presidential election, and either party could win, and it's going to be one where the future of the country is going to ride on it, because there are two very different visions and increasingly divergent visions for what our society should be, coming from the two parties. And so they're starting to freak out.
It's very reminiscent of 20.
People aren't just going to hand the presidency to Joe Biden again because he's the president.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent, the coverage of 2016. But let's take a short break because I don't want to lose you on Zoom. You'll call right back in, and then we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Stay with us. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Joe Semplinsky is our guest. Hey, Joe, did you see this piece from Politico? We keep talking about how bad the coverage has been for Biden this week. Behind the UAW's frustration with Biden, quote, abandoned by the Democrat Party, behind the UAW's frustration with Biden. That's not something you would normally see, and you know this, but Trump got a lot of union support back in the day.
Yeah, especially rank and file union members.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a little bit of a realignment. You know, 30 years ago, people was, Republicans are the party of these rich elite, and the Democrats are somehow the party of the working man. It's, to me, there's been a reversal, at least to some degree, of that.
I agree.
And certainly you see big business elites, especially on cultural stuff, have gotten really liberal and are really in with the Democrats' social agenda is. And you, on the other side of things, you see sort of the values of your average person, I think, more reflected in what the Republican Party is doing. And that's certainly been the case since Donald Trump came down the escalator in 2015, that he appeals to a broader group of the population than Republicans are stereotypically considered to appeal to. I think that's a great thing for the Republican Party.
I agree.
Because there are a lot more regular people than there are rich guys.
Right.
And if our agenda, which is still a pro-business agenda, so that we're still acting what's in the interests of the economy and people that are owning business, people that are working for business, if our agenda is appealing to people that care about economic prosperity, people that are concerned about just how radical culturally the Democrats are getting, that's a pretty broad swath of the electorate. And those type of articles are the type of things that we talk about the Democrats getting a little freaked out. If your rank and file auto worker is saying Joe Biden doesn't speak for me,
that's red flags.
A pretty important part of the Democrat coalition that gets them to a majority of the country. So I say to all union workers and blue collar workers, you should look at what the Democrats are doing to you, and you should really come in, the water's warm, and become a Republican. It's what's actually in your family's interest, but it's also what's in your economic interest.
I had to mention this, and there's probably bigger things that we could talk about, but James Freeman wrote in the Wall Street Journal that he believes, not that he would win, but he believes that former, now disgraced governor Andrew Cuomo should run in the primary because it would draw other candidates that may do better than Biden. He did good last time. He polled under 1%.
That is a pretty silly argument. I don't agree with that.
Okay.
One, I don't think that somebody is sitting out going, I'm not going to run against Biden, but Cuomo's doing it, now I will.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
understand how that logic works, just from somebody who's sophisticated enough to be a viable presidential candidate. And also, Andrew Cuomo's a scumbag.
Right.
Like, I mean, he left office because he was about to be impeached for rampant and repeated sexual harassment.
Yes.
That's before we get into the fact he killed thousands
of
senior citizens with bad policy.
Yeah.
So Andrew Cuomo is very lucky he's not in jail.
Exactly.
Very, very, very lucky he's not in jail. And he just they said he gets to keep his $5 million too. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I saw that.
So he's a rich guy who's not. He should be given that money back. He should be going to jail for all the things that he's been accused of.
Right.
And he's lucky that didn't go that way.
Yep.
So he should just go off into the sunset and go away, and we should never ever hear from Andrew Cuomo again.
Yes.
He should go find a small town in the middle of nowhere and make brooms or something.
Yeah.
And
just live life. Exactly. So I thought that was funny. I do want to talk about Romney's retirement. Now, typical Romney fashion, of course, he does it in a way that he can also take not just a dig on Biden, but at Trump. Because that's kind of been. I'm not a big Romney fan. Full disclosure, I'll put that out there. So this doesn't mean anything.
I'm not either.
Okay, good. One thing I love about his, because they want to be glowing in this because he takes a dig at Trump, but when you read his biography, it's like, isn't this the worst politician resume you could have, not just from the stance of losing, but just carpetbagging, the whole he's the definition of a career politician. And
what has bothered me about Mitt Romney from the jump, this is well before Trump.
Right.
This is not like a Trump, pro-Trump.
Sure.
It's just what bothers me about Mitt Romney is the lack of authenticity.
Yes.
Right. Oh, I'm going to run for Senate in Massachusetts, which is what was the first thing he ran against Ted Kennedy, and he was going to run as this liberal. Then he's going to be this governor in Massachusetts. Then he's going to run for president as a conservative. Then he's going to move to Utah.
Right.
And be a senator there. So he's been this chameleon, and it was never more apparent than when he went and begged Trump for a job.
Exactly.
And they took that picture where he looks like this sort of, oh, please, Mr. Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
And Trump's just smirking, knowing he's never going to give this a job.
No.
This guy has been so many different
slimy.
things.
Yeah.
And he's never just been somebody who comes across as, hey, this is what I believe. This is why I believe it. This is who I am. This is where I'm from. There's no there. There's no real there.
Right.
And he's morphed so many times. And that really bothers me. And what I've learned from being in politics and talking to voters is, especially in this part of the world, especially in the southern tier, where your listeners and viewers are, they really like authenticity. They like people that they can relate to, who are like them, who aren't pretentious, that are what they say they are, and that you know what you get. And I've seen where they even if they're not 100% in agreement with that,
right,
they respect it because it's real.
Right. And
Romney is not real.
No.
He's been so many different things with so many different people, and so
I would
again, maybe he can go off with Andrew Cuomo, find a little town, make rooms, and live out a happy existence, not being part of politics.
I would argue that it was kind of Romney that was a tipping point that led to Trump, because it reminds me of, as a Republican, and I've told many people this, especially friends that are trying to understand, liberal friends trying to understand, it's like one of the rises to Trump was we were told the only way we can win is with John McCain, and then he runs a horrible campaign. And then the only way we can win is with Romney. Well, Romney attacked Trump in the future a lot more than he ever attacked Obama when he was on stage with him. You remember that. So we kept being told, and then to add the fuel to the fire, we're told the only person that can beat Hillary Clinton is Jeb Bush. So you get those and all of a sudden people are saying, you know what? Even when we win, we lose. So let's go for broke. And that's what I've said.
At this point, what do we got to lose? We've lost the last two elections, and Jeb came out and was this dud.
Yeah.
So I think, and in many ways, they're sort of the antithesis of each other.
Yeah.
As far as demeanor is concerned, obviously they're both rich businessmen and what have you, but you have this sort of common touch with Trump, where he can sort of, even though he's Donald Trump,
right,
he can sort of build this connection with his audience in a way that Mitt Romney never could do.
No.
So I would agree in some ways that Trump, the response to Trump that he got in 2015, 2016 is a reaction to some of the failures of Romney in 12.
Yeah.
And you have this sort of buttoned up, perfect hair, everything's run by the book and exactly what the consultants say it should be. Romney is a consultant.
Right.
And as opposed to this wild man who's just going to let it rip.
Yeah.
Swing for the fence.
Yeah.
And one of them works a lot better because guess what? Your average person isn't scripted. Your average person doesn't have perfect hair. I know. Your average person isn't wearing the suit that's perfect and listening to consultants about how to say this word or that word. Trump exists more as something in reality that people are used to as just as how a human being functions, whereas Romney comes across as like this robot pretending to be a human. Sort of thing. I agree.
Hey, we got to go here, Joe, but before we do, how are things in the local races? How can people get involved?
I'm excited. We're past Labor Day now, so we're getting into the real season of it. We've got competitive races in Corning, competitive races in Cornell, competitive races in Wayland, Cohocton, and I'm very excited about our candidates. So please we're all talking about 24.
Right.
24 is important, but don't forget 23. these local races, one vote can make a really big difference. Yes. So please, 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 if you're somebody maybe that's a Republican, only votes for president, only votes in even-numbered years, get out and vote in 23. It's going to take 10 minutes. Just go do it. Vote for a Republican ticket. If we can get some extra people doing that, we're going to have a fantastic year in Steuben County.
And then you can always get the sticker and put it on social media, and everybody thinks you're cool. It's win-win.
Everybody thinks you're a model citizen.
That's right. Joe, thanks for giving us so much time this morning.
Frank, always a pleasure.
All right. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 7 with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, join us.